Coca-Cola is the most popular soft drink in Mexico, but it is reported that the country's insatiable thirst for sugary sodas has in part led to a diabetic crisis. In many impoverished communities, Coca-Cola is more widely available than clean drinking water, and in some areas, Coca-Cola is the obvious choice for quenching your thirst under the Mexican sun. The combination of poor nutrition and high sugar intake from soda is said to be lethal, and is an issue many have reported widely in the past few years. So let's travel to the Coke capital of the world to learn more about the reality of the issues faced by many Mexicans. Whilst watching this video, please leave a comment below, like the video, and subscribe for more where this came from. I truly appreciate it. Unlike in the United States, where Coca-Cola is sweetened with corn syrup, the Mexican version uses real cane sugar, much alike the variant found in the United Kingdom, which is harvested and processed in a traditional manner before being poured into cans or glasses. In contrast to the high fructose corn syrup used in the US, only the sugarcane version of the drink is produced in Mexico and is reportedly preferred by many, as you may have seen as a popular internet fad enjoyed by American tourists visiting the country. However, Coca-Cola intake, it is said, has troubled the country in reaching epidemic levels of diabetes in some regions of Mexico. Chiapas is the poorest and southernmost state in Mexico, and its residents in this small region consume more Coca-Cola per person compared to any other nation on Earth. Imagine that for a second, this tiny region is responsible for more Coca-Cola sales than entire countries. You might think it's a joke, but I assure you there's no punchline. The average annual consumption of Coca-Cola in the state of Chiapas is calculated to be 821 liters, according to a study published in 2019. That's the same as 2.2 liters every day, per person. To put it into perspective, the average American consumes only 3% of that amount. That would equate to quite an amount of McDonald's trips. The reason to this insane consumption of the sugary beverage is complex at first glance, but the bottom line is actually more simple than you'd imagine. The ease of availability and low cost of Coca-Cola in Chiapas is said to be a key factor in the city's disproportionately high consumption of the beverage. The unfortunate reality is that Coca-Cola is much more widely available than bottled water, and it costs about the same amount, roughly 20 to 40 cents per bottle. Yes, you heard it right, a bottle of famous brand cola in Mexico costs extremely little, and to say it's widely available is an extreme understatement. Coca-Cola tends to outnumber bottled water in many Mexican refrigerators found in kiosks and grocery stores. San Cristobal is home to the world-famous Coca-Cola factory, but in this part of Mexico, the brand represents much more than just a soft drink. The iconic Coca-Cola is highly spiritual and culturally significant to the social indigenous people of Chiapas, which is a highly rural and extremely poor area. Coca-Cola is presented in bottles as an offering in a community called San Juan Camula. Out of all the rituals and cultural ceremonies you can witness in the world, this particular ritual is one of the most fascinating ceremonies you will see in your life, and is performed in the shaman's central place of worship, where they believe Coke can cure the sick. So do they understand what the beverage can lead to, in high quantities over decades of consumption? It is reported that in the poorest state of Chiapas, health officials have declared a diabetic emergency due to a fourfold increase in mortality over the past 3 decades. That means the numbers in diabetes are 4 times higher than they were, roughly 30 years ago, in the late 80s and early 1990s. This event in such a concentrated part of the globe is truly staggering, especially to those of us sat at home with fresh drinking water straight out of the tap. In San Cristobal, the per capita consumption of these sugary beverages is higher than anywhere else on the planet. Diabetes is the second leading cause of death in Chiapas, after heart disease, which is currently the #1 cause of death in the country. Although Coca-Cola claims that its traditional formula now contains 30% less sugar, it appears that customers in Mexico prefer the full sugar and high gas versions of the beverage. When customers get a taste for something, it can be very hard to switch, especially a recipe as iconic as Coca-Cola's. Upon arrival, in even extremely remote areas of Mexico, you won't find it hard to count large quantities of different locations stocking Coca-Cola, with fridges packed to the brim with the iconic red label, demonstrating how pervasive Coca-Cola is in locations such as Chiapas. However, opposition is growing. Water for regular consumption is becoming more scarce in San Cristobal as the city's population rises, and this leads to poor and declining health for the villagers and townspeople. The bottom line is water is a basic human right, and we all depend on it to survive and remain in good health. Mexico's Water Commission found that the manufacturing of Coca-Cola did not threaten the population's water supply, and foreign Coca-Cola says it is committed to a responsible marketing policy that complies with the laws and regulations in Mexico, and the company has been investing in conservation projects because it recognizes the importance of water as a shared resource. In essence, Coca-Cola is often preferred as a beverage because although it contains high amounts of sugar, the water used in the beverage is at the very least clean for human consumption no matter the age of the consumer, which typical water sources in the area are not. In fact, much of the water available for consumption needs to be tested for E. coli before consumption. Critics say the money from the tax in Coca-Cola should have been spent on prevention. Many smaller communities have to work hard to help supply its residents with clean water, something many of us in other countries around the world take for granted, as we can just run a tap, and hey presto. To many in rural Mexico, regular water tests are a normal part of providing clean drinking water for the communities. The water used to make Coca-Cola in Mexico comes from deep wells, while the water used for human consumption comes from springs above ground, and if not properly tested, this water could contain E. coli, and in many cases does, which can lead to extremely adverse consequences in human health. Water must be tested after 24 hours, as in that period, the bacteria can multiply and undergo the aforementioned transformation, after having potentially come into contact with fish, or bacteria which is unsuitable for a healthy body. In rural Mexico, huge majorities of the homes you see lack sewage systems, and instead the people who live and reside there dump their wastewater directly into the rivers. This might sound like medieval Europe, but this is how many in Mexico are currently living in the 21st century. Water specialists must continue to collect samples to test for E. coli on a regular basis. But many argue that the case of Coca-Cola in Mexico goes way deeper. You might ask, what about Coca-Cola's water consumption, needed in order to create the famous beverage? Well, to create the delicious drink, the manufacturers tap into the water that is underneath the city. Many say that it's not fair that hundreds of thousands of people in the dry season have to make do with a meager supply of water of terrible quality while a single Coca-Cola plant benefits from an abundant supply of clean water used in manufacturing. In many of the tests on the water from the higher elevation levels, there is almost no doubt that high levels of E. coli will be found due to its non-safe source. This is nasty water. And when you combine the water problem with the problem of children growing up malnourished from drinking contaminated water, you have a recipe for disaster. Even in some outlying indigenous areas today, Coca-Cola is king in these communities, and local shamans have been using Coca-Cola as part of religious ceremonies. Yes, that's right, indigenous shamans do perform rituals with the use of Coca-Cola. The ritual is a strange blend of Catholicism and mysticism, and it involves the sacrifice of animals. But what is really mind-blowing is how Coca-Cola is incorporated into it. Many of these shamans will have refrigerators filled with Coca-Cola just next to the shrine, some making a living selling the beverage themselves, which adds a further problem to the entire scenario, that being that many bodegas and kiosks, or more so the business owners behind these markets, depend on selling the beverage to live, as so many customers in Mexico demand the beverage despite the issues with high consumption, as it is what they have grown up with and is all they know. Is it possible that the prevalence of diabetes in this area is related to the widespread availability of sugary beverages? Whatever the reason, it's clear that the consumption of sugary drinks is deeply ingrained in the culture of the people, and Mexico as a country. Coca-Cola, however, makes clear claims it does not market to children under the age of 12. The sugar levels in many of the inhabitants' blood in the area is extremely high, and what we can definitely say for sure is that this is a large issue which has grown dramatically over the last 30 years. Coca-Cola, however, claims that it has lowered the calorie content of their whole drinks range in Mexico by over 25% since 2018. This decrease is attributable to a decrease in added sugar. Diabetes deaths, however, remain extremely high. More than 3,000 people a year die from diabetes-related complications in Chiapas. People in this state have been warned, but it hasn't stopped them from buying more of their favorite carbonated beverage, even though diabetes remains the second leading cause of death in the state, behind heart disease. But what do you think? Leave a comment below and like this video and subscribe if you want to see more where this came from. I truly appreciate it. Take it easy, and see you next time.